Well, I never thought things would be so complicated with a second child, but it took quite a bit of time to get the second video uploaded, even though this was done sometime back in December. So, picking up where we left off on the Edelbrock Performer Series intake manifold installation on the 68 Impala 307 motor in the 57 Chevy truck. First things first, I plugged all the ports, anything that was open on the head, and I lined the valley with some pretty thick shop towels to provide a barrier for any crud and nastiness that was being scraped or removed. So notice around the distributor hole, I was actually pushing outwards so nothing would go in the motor. So, and an oil change was done after, but not soon enough. Anyway, another story, another time. So cleaning everything off, when you do this, you want to make sure everything is not surgically sterile, but as good as it can be. And what I was doing here was scraping off God knows how many years of baked on material. So depending on what you find online and what you want to install with intake manifolds and their gaskets, some will suggest that you put the silicone RTV around both sides of the whole gasket. That's, I guess, someone's preference, but I don't recommend that. The whole purpose of the gaskets and the engineering behind this now, gaskets have come such a long way, not being cork and they're Teflon coated and things now, that you don't want to do that. And then when you have to remove it, like if I replace this motor in a year or so, I'm going to want that intake off. Last thing I want to do is deal with baked on, crusted on intake manifold gaskets. So you could see the amount of time I'm spending here. You also see pretty shortly that I realized I could get to a greater surface area on the intake planes of this head by removing the valve covers and the valve cover gasket. So I do that in a little bit here, but trust the gasket and the engineering behind it if you have a clean surface. What I did do is just around where the cooling ports are, kind of right there where I'm scraping right now, that is the only area where I did some auxiliary RTV around the gasket itself. I also found out from a good neighbor friend of mine, I was going to be fighting the rubbers on the intake manifold on the front and rear of the motor. But what I found out, and I didn't even know this before that time, was you just want to run a fat bead of RTV now on a nice clean surface, but don't plan on doing that unless the car is going to sit. If you're throwing an intake manifold together and you need to drive it like this afternoon or tomorrow, don't do that. But by all means, if it's like my situation where you have a somewhat heated garage and you're doing it, the best thing ever was the fat bead of RTV. I've been, since driving the car, probably 600 miles now since this is done, and I have not had an oil leak from there. I had an oil leak spring up from a valve cover gasket that was not tightened because I had someone helping me with the job, and I like to blame them, but it could have easily have been my fault as well. So you could see, like, this video is sped up to 2 times. I'm enjoying a delightful cigar, but I'm using brake clean. I buy a lot of stuff from Advanced Auto Parts. And I kind of test it at home or test it at school. And if it's good, that's where I buy from too. And that's where I guide my school shop into doing the purchasing from, because I kind of buy it, test it at home. It's good. And if I know it'll withstand the abuses of 115 teenagers, then you know it's good stuff. So this was just a lot of tedium here, a lot of scraping. Later on too, I went through and I chased the thread holes with a tap to make sure all the bolts would go in nicely. So one thing I learned from my high school auto shop teacher was like closing your eyes and just feeling across the surface, depending on how calloused and coarse your hands are, will give you a really good idea. Like visually, it might look good, but close your eyes and run your hands across the surface and you will feel those imperfections if they are in fact pretty bad. So different variations of scrapers and stuff. Glad I kept the fan shroud on and the old radiator for this part. Actually, I think I had the old radiator out, but anyway, now I'm starting the port removal, and notice how I pull inwards towards the valley, and any crud that I scraped then also got pulled into that towel and the valley of the motor in the center. And once these are all removed, later on, you'll see I actually, folded it inwards, and I had a very clean center part. And I'm going to show that off right now. So you could see now I have very clean intakes. The crossover, everything is good. And now I go on to test and trial fitting. So Edelbrock's kit was phenomenal. I don't know if it came with the kit or I actually bought it from the Winter Circle in Joliet, Illinois through eBay. And then I later found out they were closer to home. So I was going to buy it from somewhere else, and I realized support local businesses in these times. And I purchased through eBay from a local shop after I called them. And yeah, it worked out great. So test fitting them. And now you can see the valve cover magically disappeared because I quickly realized I want a little bit more area to work with and better visuals and forgiveness when installing this. So while I had all this apart too, I did just like give a quick look to all the rockers and push rods, and nothing looked bent. It all looked very happy. So it's a good runner so far. Speaking of which, I also just took a 70-mile camping trip on it this weekend, 35 miles each way. And car ran great at highway speeds, especially with the new drive shaft I just put in it. That I'll save for another video or another episode. Sorry, but again, all of your likes and all of your subscribes. I know I was away for a while with the baby, and it was great to see that I still had subscribers. So we're at the 205 range. What I just showed were the instructions, and it shows the bolts. It did have a specific torque and pattern. And what I wanted to do at this point was make sure this was the right one and test fit it. And don't worry, the surfaces were all very clean, but it is by far the shiniest thing under the hood of my truck now. So this is what I was talking about. I chased some of the thread holes, especially around the cooling jackets, because they were more corroded when compared to some of the other surfaces, or I'm sorry, bolt holes. So went through the tap. I don't remember the tap because now it's been 5 months, but I could guess, but I don't want someone in the comments tearing me a new one. So I went through off camera. I just took a single bolt from the new bolt kit and I chased it into each threaded hole to make sure it went in, and any ones that had issues were cleaned up with the tap. Yes, and I was enjoying a Romeo or was it a Rocky Patel Vintage? This is the cigar that I am smoking throughout this task. So with this video being 2 times the speed, I'm also at 44 minutes. So it's going to be a 22-minute video. And the greatest thing was, like, I did everything you see in this video in 45 minutes. So all in all, the job ended up being like a 3.5-hour job. There were snags, and you don't see them in this video, but I'm going to do a follow-up video of like the 600-mile update on how everything is. And you'll see what I had to fab to get some of the things to work, because in my brain, I thought, oh, Edelbrock intake will just directly replace the stock one, but it did not. And I had issues with the kickdown cable, the throttle cable mount, and like 1 or 2 other things, which you'll see. So this was what I found to be recommended online. I did a fat bead of RTV around the cooling jackets, or the cooling ports for the head, or the cooling jacket holes, or whatever you want to call them. I cut a very big open tube. I was always very cheap and like tried to reuse RTV. This guy, since this is such a regular daily driver, I did all new tube, and I didn't even use the whole thing. I threw it out, so I didn't waste anything. So then that got laid down. And the idea with not using the rubber on the front and the back versus the other one is, a lot of people won't realize when they put the back on, or the intake on, the back will shift and it unseats the rubber, and the rubber will have a shoulder, but there's different rubbers for different years, early small block Chevy versus late small block Chevy, and I didn't want to take any chances. So I did the RTV bead all around, and then I just had to make sure I did like a helicopter landing, where I did a flat, perfect drop down where the bolt holes align. So this RTV bead, I wish I had zoomed in for you, but my hands were filthy for the camera. RTV bead is going all the way up to the intake manifold gasket on both sides. And yeah, it's going to be good. So moving forward, finishing up that rear, it ends up being solid. Get it underneath the edges of the gasket. And then you'll also see I do end up doing the front side the cooling areas. That again was important to me because of a little bit of vacuum leak you could still dial out, but a coolant leak, everything has to come back together. But I also trusted the factory reinforced areas around those intake ports to be good. So at this point, I was all set to drop the intake down, and I was overwhelmed with excitement. But I got high up on a stool for this to make sure it was just about perfect. Still had to move it, which frustrated me because I didn't want goop going into those intake valleys or ports. But I think in the end, it ended up all right. So at this point, the jewelry is on, and I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but I was probably dropped the bolts and was looking for them. So at this point, the fancy new Edelbrock bolts that came with the kit started going in with a little washer. And I was going to use the original intake manifold bolts, and I just figured, I'm like, no, that it's too nice to have something like that on there. So moving forward. So now you get to see, I always stagger my intake or any bolt installation like that. So what ends up happening is even when hand tightening, the staggering levels out the applied pressure to stuff, and hopefully if there were to be interference with the liquid RTV, that it kind of eliminates that as well. So these bolts all go by hand. And you can see my big gorilla hands are slowly trying to get in there. One issue I did have was interference with the extension and the one length of socket I had. And eventually I did follow the torque specifications. I really have to hand it to Edelbrock. They did a phenomenal job with the instructions and explanations of stuff. Torque specs, like what to expect with different types of motors or heads that you may have. And it's all there. But again, what I didn't plan for too was I did, while I was excited in one of the earlier videos with the Dorman cooler neck I had for the thermostat housing, it turned out to be tricky because it had one side bolt was longer, the other side was shorter. So it was quite frustrating in the sense that I made a mistake and almost pulled the threads out of the new intake manifold. So I did clean those up and straighten them out. But I recommend maybe a universal instead of an actual Chevy one, so you can adjust the neck direction for your upper radiator hose depending on what you're running. I've also, thank you for the attention, had requests to follow up on that radiator video. Again, I'm trying my best. It's my first job is being a husband and a father. My second job is being a teacher. My third job is working on my fun stuff and making YouTube videos. So I started everything to level out the gasket pressure with a 1/4-inch drive ratchet, just real small. That's something I learned from a really, really good builder years ago, and then also from book learning. And then I began the torque specifications on this. If I remember, it's in like the 20s or 30s, may have even been inch pounds. I had to borrow a tool from a friend in order to do that because I did not have an inch pound torque wrench, which was not good. So at this point, I'm prepping, finding the bolts for the intake manifold. I'm sorry, for the gooseneck for the thermostat housing. And I did find out too that old thermostat I pulled out was frustratingly brand new. So that's okay. Knowing that I'm putting it together with all new parts in that sense was good. But that was me getting the instructions and following the torque pattern. And I believe it was a two-step torque process. So you do like 15 and then 30 or 20 and then 40 or something like that. And I followed the pattern and how it was mounted to the motor. So this is the part as I slowly get better with video editing. My goals and my hopes are to have you have some fun background music or something instead of just my voice or silence. But we'll get there. I'm getting better, guys and girls. I've had all kinds of subscribers. I'm gonna have another super clean video coming up where we will do a giveaway, and the winner will win something directly drop shipped from Super Clean. So stay tuned with that, like and subscribe. And then I think when we hit 300 subscribers, I may legitimately buy some tools out of my own budget. Budget being like when I sell my old parts on eBay, I will use that to buy a tool set for someone and send it out your way because it's a thank you, you guys. It's truly humbling to see you guys and girls and everyone just become part of this channel and slowly watching it grow. By no means is this something super unique. But if you ever have videos or questions or anything you want to see, let me know. So at this point, I had to pull the intake manifold that I had rested outside in the snow. It was driving me nuts, and the vacuum port to pull out the carburetor mounting studs because it turns out they were ARP mounting studs. So those were really good. I did run into an issue with them later on. I don't know if one of the casting holes was slightly off on the intake, but I was able to get the carb mounted. I'm going to see if I got that one filmed. But the video here is strictly focusing on getting that intake on. And then everything else just kind of goes back together the way it came apart. So at this point, manifold lined up well. So we started getting the valve cover bolts back on. And that intake manifold was outside. I was going to do a super clean cleaning video. And I didn't because we got like that random 19 inches of snow. So I had to dig my way out to my garage to be able to do anything. But so I had to find the intake manifold under the snow, pull it in. And yes, I was that neighbor for a while with car parts in the yard. Pull the intake manifold back in to harvest the cooling temp sensor, which doesn't work. I'm still trying to trace that down. The carb studs and the vacuum port for the back. Also, I think one of the plugs, the coolant passage plugs. So you can see it slowly going together with the hold downs. And now more than ever, I think maybe today I'm going to go home and film an update video on how well this went. Because knock on wood, I have not had any leaks, vacuum leaks or nothing. I did run into a slight issue with timing when I switched over to the HEI, but for the most part, things did go rather smoothly. We're getting to the end pretty close, pretty soon, pretty quick here. But you're going to see I just do a quick once over of the intake mounting bolts. If I find the right socket. At 2x speed. And then I realized, oh, I'm pulling valve covers, tightening valve covers. We're making sure everything's tight, good, and preventing leakage. This whole video clip will end with me trying that Dorman thermostat housing, putting the new thermostat in. And what ended up being tricky was it was a two different size bolt model versus my old one, which was two of the same size. So it ended up being a little creative, and I'm pretty sure I already mentioned this. But tightening the valve cover, one of the best things I had since I have these on and off quite a bit is what's it called? Rubber gaskets, which are phenomenal. Here's the Dorman going on with the almost long enough bolt and the bolt that's probably a little bit too long. And we wrap this up fairly quickly here. So thank you to everyone who's taken some time to view and to watch. I'm going to try to get another video up and running soon because our school year just ended. And I'll actually have some time to get things together. So only thing that's keeping me going is viewer support. So please like, please subscribe. Subscribe more than like. And look forward to showing you more videos in the future.